Darkcast Network. The light shines brightest on our indie podcasts.
I'm Edward October, creator-host of OctoberPod, and I'm proud to be partnered with the Darkcast Network. For dark-sided podcasts of impeccable taste, choose one of the many fine podcasts of the Darkcast Network. The Darkcast Network. I recommend it.
War continues to rage across the globe. Our valiant men and women have been winning battles as the war continues to march on. Hollywood continues to produce clone after clone of the films you used to enjoy. There have been some defectors, but most remakes continue to assault your sensibilities. Our small troop of trained experts continue to expose these imposters while showing Hollywood a better way. Support the invasion of the remake by listening, reviewing, and subscribing. Your knowledge is power. We're all in this together. Spread the word.
Subscribe to Invasion of the Remake on all major podcast providers. New episodes dropping weekly.
At invasionoftheremake.wixsite.com/podcast.
Hey, do I really need a disclaimer? Okay. Beyond the Rainbow is a true crime podcast. I tell stories of murder, torture, sexual assault, rape, violence, drugs, rock and roll, and I use curse words. A lot. So hold on to your granny panties, 'cause I'm coming in hot. Oh, that rhymed. Hey there, Rainbow Warriors. Welcome to Beyond the Rainbow, True Crimes of the LGBTQ+. I'm your host, CJ. You know, every time I meet someone new and I tell them that my name is CJ, they're always, DJ? TJ? I correct them and I say, no, CJ. And you can remember that by thinking, oh, she's cute and jovial. I usually get a giggle out of the person when I tell them that, or they roll their eyes at me. What, I'm not jovial? Beyond the Rainbow is a one-woman, researched, written, recorded, and edited production. That one woman is me. Why do I do it? Because I must be a superhero. I am a mom. I'm also proud to be a badass. And should you feel so compelled to also be a badass and have your name shouted out here on the show, I have a Buy Me a Coffee /Rainbow Crimes account at buymeacoffee.com. Some of you might remember back in March for Women's History Month, I covered lesbians in Nazi Germany. This time it's our gay brothers' turn as I take a look into the life of some who were forced to wear a pink triangle along with their prisoner numbers. The pink triangle was a symbol of a prisoner's sexual identity. In later years, the LGBTQ community would reclaim the pink triangle and make it a symbol of pride and LGBTQ rights. Many say that pink triangle serves as a reminder, never again. And they're referring to how it was used in Nazi Germany. There, the pink triangle was a badge of shame. But pink triangles weren't the only colorful triangle being worn by the prisoners. Green were worn by criminals, brown by Roma people, which were people of Romanian descent, often considered gypsies. Political prisoners had red triangles, and Jehovah's Witnesses wore purple triangles. But none of those other triangles were hated by Nazis more than the pink. Gay men were treated just as badly as lesbian women, and in most cases, they were treated far worse. Gay men were considered the lowest of the low, and not just by the Nazi officers and Nazi prison guards. The other prisoners hated gay prisoners too. It was a bad all-round situation if you were gay during the Hitler regime. One of the most feared presences of Buchenwald concentration camp was a woman known as the Witch of Buchenwald. Her name was Ilse Koch. Not Crotch, Koch. She was a librarian. It's always those quiet, bookish ones you gotta watch out for, huh? Ilse was the wife of Colonel Karl Koch of the SS. The SS stood for Schutzstaffel. Translated means protective echelon. Simply put, these were Hitler's best officers. He hand-chose them. Ilse was a large, red-headed woman, and she was given free rein of the Buchenwald concentration camp. Ilse was also a sexual sadist. She'd ride around the camp on her horse, and she'd use her riding crop. For those who don't know, a riding crop is usually a small leather whip that's used to prod a horse along. But Ilse, she liked to use her riding crop to whip the male prisoners. She would also force some of them into sex, and it didn't matter if they were wearing a pink triangle or not to Ilse. And here's a gross thing. She also would collect tattooed skin from the prisoners after they were killed. She would send the tattooed skin out to make lampshades, book covers, and gloves to wear. It all seems a little bit Ed Gainish, but maybe Ed Gain learned from the Witch of Buchenwald. After World War II was over, both Karl and Ilse Koch were arrested. Karl would face execution, and Ilse went through 2 trials. She finally ended up in a prison in Bavaria. She stayed there until she was about 60 years old, and at the age of 60, Ilse started to have some mental issues. She started to have dreams, or maybe they were hallucinations, that survivors of the concentration camps were coming into her cell and they were trying to hurt her and kill her. Ilse ended up hanging herself in her prison cell. Gay prisoners were used as medical experiments. Buchenwald was a camp that first started the medical experiments with gay men. 2 of the experiments involved castration. And then there was another experiment that was ran by a Danish doctor. While Denmark was very proud of their Nazi resistance and assistance in helping their Jewish residents, this Danish doctor joined the Nazi Party. And he did it just so he could conduct medical experiments on gay men. This doctor was made an SS, and his name was Dr. Karl Varney. Dr. Varney's research was to find a cure for homosexuality. He was actually excited to go to a concentration camp, because here he would have a seemingly endless supply of victims, patients. He started at the Buchenwald concentration camp. Here he would insert artificial hormone glands into a gay man's groin. And due to unsanitary conditions, several of these men would die. The insertion point on the man would get infected, and then it would be a very painful death from the infection. Where many of these war criminals, such as the doctor, were caught after the war ended, Dr. Varney would elude detection, and he remained a free man, convincing the conquering countries, namely Britain, his work was all in the name of science. Gay men were used as target practice by the Nazi guards. The guards would use the pink triangle to take aim, and then they would shoot the gay man in his chest. Other prisoners would beat gay prisoners, sometimes to death. And the amount of gay male prisoners wasn't small by any means. There were tens of thousands of gay males in the concentration camps in Nazi-infested areas. At the end of World War II, it's estimated 500,000. That's 500,000 gay men died in concentration camps. Some of the pink triangle men would be taken as sex slaves by the SS and the Kapos. Kapos were prisoners who were appointed by the SS to watch over other prisoners. It was the Kapos' job to keep the prisoners in check. The Nazis deemed these prisoners trustworthy, and to designate Kapos kept the cost down of paying the SS's to watch over the camps. At the Flossenburg concentration camp, the commander of the camp was an SS officer. he would order gay men to be flogged. As the gay man would scream when he was being whipped, the commander would start panting with excitement, and then he would masturbate in his pants until he ejaculated. That commander did not mind who was there watching him do this either. Other camps, gay men would be tortured by having their testicles submerged first in ice water and then in boiling hot water alternately. SS guards would also take broken broom handles or wood pieces, broken branches, and then they would shove them as far up a gay man's ass as they possibly could. Oftentimes they would masturbate as they did this. Although these acts were acts of violence, they served as homoerotic stimuli to many of these guards, and it would be pretty much impossible to convince me that these guards weren't somewhat sexually fluid, but they were trying to repress their desires. And we'll probably go more into that in my next episode. 5 gay men at the Sachsenhausen camp had garden hoses shoved down their throats, and then they were clamped there so they couldn't remove them. Once the men were primed with the hose stuck down their throat, the water was turned on. Each of the 5 men would die from drowning. At that very same camp, SS guards would get nooses and they would put them around a gay man's neck, and then they would tie the loose end to a trolley car. The guards then pushed the trolley car down a steep hill. If the gay man couldn't keep up, he would fall and be strangled to death by the noose. Gay men were also given the very worst jobs in all of the camps, from working in the rock quarries to shoveling snow with their bare hands. Their work shifts were longer and often much more strenuous than the other jobs prisoners were forced to do. Nazi soldiers felt that the hard work would make otherwise soft men into manly men, real men. What a crock of shit. And you know, when I first started researching this topic, it never even occurred to me a good portion of the gay men in these concentration camps, they were German. But I guess we have to remember the Nazis were huge on procreating the perfect Aryan blonde-haired, blue-eyed children for their cult. Organization. But you know what I mean. Since gay men weren't seen as studs to impregnate Aryan women, they were considered useless. One of the gay heroes of the Holocaust was a young man named Alfred Hirsch. He went by Freddy. Freddy was a 24-year-old gay prisoner who died before the end of World War II. Freddy was of German and Jewish descent. His life prior to the Nazi takeover was almost perfect. He worked as a gymnastics teacher at a school, and he'd been an athlete all his life. Freddy lived with his partner, a man named Jan Mautner in Brno, which is part of the Czech Republic. Freddy had to flee Germany when the Nuremberg laws went into effect. These laws would criminalize Jews. So Freddy went to Czechoslovakia. That's how he ended up in Brno, and how I imagine he met his partner Jan. In March 1939, Nazis invaded and took over Czechoslovakia. The Nazis imposed restrictions on the Jewish children. They banned them from public schools with German and Czech children. In fact, the Nazis didn't want Jewish children learning anything. Freddy chose to stay with his students instead of fleeing to another country with Jan. And that's how he ended up in Theresienstadt. And don't expect me to pronounce that name again. This was a transit camp for Czech Jews before Germans would send their prisoners to a killing center, a concentration camp, or even a labor camp. It was kind of like a check-in post, I guess. Freddy was a counselor for the children at the transit camp. He never hid the fact that he was gay, but it didn't seem to matter as much to the guards here. Freddy was there to do a job, and that was to maintain order of the children and to entertain them. When the scared children first arrived at the transit camp, after they were plucked away from their parents, it was Freddy's kind and handsome face they first saw. He would reassure them everything would be okay, and if they needed medical attention when they arrived, Freddy would make sure they got it. He was in good standing with the Nazis that ran the transit camp. This enabled him to often take some of the children off the list of deportees to camps where they would surely be put to death. Freddy saved many children by secretively doing this. As I kind of mentioned before, the Germans forbid the partially Jewish children to have an education, but in the privacy of their own quarters, children were still being taught. Freddy also made sure that they kept themselves clean every day as well. And as often as possible, Freddy would get clearance to take the children outside for sports and games. He felt it was important that the children not just stay physically fit, but mentally fit as well. And exercise was a very important way for them to do this. In August 1943, a shipment, and I really hate saying the word shipment for children, but a shipment of 1,200 kids would arrive at the transit camp. These children had almost all witnessed the slayings of their families. Many of the kids were malnourished and sickly looking. There was a ban on anyone who tried to go see these kids. But Freddy, he ignored the ban, and he would sneak in to visit the children. He wanted to be there to comfort them. Freddy felt like he had good standing with the Nazi guards, and that this would keep him from being punished should he be caught. Unfortunately, Freddy was caught by a Czech guard and he was arrested. Freddy was then sent to another camp called Buchenwald. This is part of the Auschwitz concentration camp. Buchenwald is said to have been the principal and most notorious of all the concentration extermination camps. Once he was there, Freddy was appointed to be a capo. But this isn't what Freddy wanted to do. He requested and he was quickly transferred to be the leader of the children's quarters at the family camp at Buchenwald. At this camp, Freddy again was insistent that the children keep themselves clean. Survivors of this camp were interviewed as grown-ups, and they say that they're certain that they were only survivors because of Freddy. Freddy and his cleanliness will keep you healthy mantra, and his cleanliness inspections. These survivors said that they were very susceptible to diseases from unsanitary living environments, so keeping their bodies clean on a daily, it was key to their survival. The conditions at the family camp were dire, and they were worse than most of the other camps. Within 6 months, almost a quarter of the prisoners in the family camp had died. Most all were elderly. Over in the children's section of that same camp that Freddy oversaw, there was nearly a 0% mortality rate. Here again, Freddy insisted on keeping good relations with the Nazi guards, and the guards seemed to really like him. He was charming and he spoke German as well as they did. Because of this, Freddy was able to secure better food for the kids. Their soups were thicker, and once in a while they were even given a piece of bread or noodles soaked in milk. All of these things helped keep these kids alive longer. It was all due to Freddy. In the wintertime, Freddy got permission to have the children do their roll call inside. Inside, they had some heat. All of the other prisoners had to endure roll call in the freezing cold snow, without the luxury of warm clothing. The children's block was right next to the hospital ward, and this hospital ward was ran by the notorious Dr. Joseph Mengele. His moniker was the Angel of Death. Mengele would also perform sadistic experiments on prisoners in the camp. But Freddy, he had that way about him, and he was able to convince Mengele to open up another block for the children when the main block of the family camp for kids became overcrowded. This too would save the lives of the kids. Freddy got word that his time at Auschwitz was coming to an end. He was being transferred to yet another camp. So Freddy took measures to appoint a new children's block leader and make sure that his counselors were well trained in caring for the kids. And then the day came, in March of 1944. Freddy was part of a group that was being transferred to a nearby detention camp. This is where Nazis had plans to execute thousands of Czech Jewish people. Another prisoner had told Freddy about the Nazis' plan. Freddy was then asked to lead a prisoner uprising and revolt. But Freddy, he knew if he were to lead an uprising and revolt, it would mean death for the children in his care. Freddy was not prepared to make a decision like that about the children. He asked for some time to think about the uprising and revolt. And then in desperation, Freddy took some phenobarbital tablets and he ended his life. Freddy had been called an unknown hero because not many historians really knew his story. They didn't know how he had risked his life getting close to Nazi officers so that he could save the lives of Jewish and partially Jewish children in the concentration camps. Rest in power, Freddy. Gad Beck was half Jewish and half German. He was an educator. He was a fighter with the underground resistance. And Gad was a gay man. Because he was with the underground, he was able to avoid detection by the Nazis. Because Gad was gay, he was able to tap into some of his non-Jewish gay friends as resources. These friends were able to get supplies that Gad needed to keep Jewish people underground until they could be smuggled into a more neutral territory, usually Switzerland. During this time, Gad's lover had been arrested and taken to Auschwitz. But being a brave man, Gad stole a Nazi soldier uniform. He dressed the Nazi soldier part and he entered Auschwitz. He requested the release of his boyfriend, saying he needed to transfer this man to a non-existent work project. Auschwitz guards believed Gad, and they gave him his boyfriend to transport to the fake work project. Gad was successful in breaking his boyfriend out of one of the very worst concentration camps ever. But sadly, his boyfriend told Gad that he couldn't leave his parents behind in Auschwitz. So the boyfriend returned to the camp, and not long later he would be executed along with his parents. Gad had helped to save thousands of Jewish people from these camps. Weeks after he had rescued his boyfriend, a Nazi spy would infiltrate the underground where Gad was, and Gad, along with others, would be arrested and taken to a Jewish transit camp in Berlin. Thankfully, the war would end before Gad could be exterminated by the Nazis. Gad was a survivor, and he helped to arrange for other Jewish survivors and himself to travel to and live in Palestine. Gad moved back to Berlin in 1979, and Berlin is where he died at the age of 88 in 2013. Rest in power, Gad. Another gay man who helped others was a Dutch artist named Willem Arandu. If you listen to my coverage on lesbians in Nazi Germany, you might remember a woman by the name of Frida. Frida hid in plain sight by dressing as a man, and she worked for the Dutch underground resistance. Willem was also a part of the group Frida worked with, and he too played a role in the bombing of the Amsterdam Registry Building. That was the building that was bombed and ruined legal documents with people's names, birthdays, and other important information that the Nazis would use to assess if someone was Jewish or a political enemy of the Nazis. It was Willem's job to help falsify papers of Dutch Jews, and he saved a countless number of lives. Unfortunately, 5 days after the Amsterdam bombing, someone in Willem's unit betrayed them. Willem was caught by the Nazis and he was executed along with 10 other people. But before Willem was executed, he asked a friend to testify after the war. He wanted the friend to tell everyone, homosexuals are not cowards. Rest in power, Willem. There will not be a true crime quickie in this episode, but I am going to follow this episode up with another episode on Nazi Germany. On the next episode, I'm going to cover gay, hypocritical Nazi officers and soldiers who worked under Hitler, and briefly talk about gay neo-Nazis of today. Love you, Rainbow Warriors, and remember, it's not a crime to be gay, unless you're a murderer.